This will be the second video to the crab claw cancer neighbor Canaanites video. And at least it looks like I can upload about 10 minutes worth. So, I was reading in chapter 14, verses 12 and 13. Okay, and I'm going to kind of show you why it grabbed my attention and what I kind of see in there and how it's also relative. Let's take a look at an old drawing I did in my late teens and early 20s. And, all throughout this time I was a vegetarian, and I was doing, and I was, I've been very spiritual very early on in my life. I always had a affinity towards things of the Spirit. And at about this time, some amazing things, as they had been ever since I was a young one, had been going on. The Spirit was leading me as it's led me to this point today. And one of these drawings, that I did, not really knowing that I was doing something that was going to be so prophetic, that was going to be so profound, and mean so much here in this time, almost, or even really 20 plus years later. And what I understand now just blows me away when I look at these drawings again. It's the proof, or at least some of the proof, some of the many, many, many things that can guarantee, at least to me, that the Spirit is working with me, and we're co-partnered together here to bring this to you, to get you to understand that you can also co-partner with the Spirit in this proclamation of the gospel, and have the courage to stand before these giants of oppression and have what it takes to bring them down. So there's a lot of things in this drawing we've already looked at. I think at least what's relative now for the scripture here, verse 12 and 13, chapter 14, Zechariah, is this individual here has a USA on his chest and NASA. Look at that. Now obviously that's a spaceman. Got his little oxygen tanks, aka air, Satan, prince of the powers of the air. But notice his curious little gloves, and they, to me, look like crab claws. And what inspired me to draw that drawing was just something that popped in my head as I was drawing this entire thing. I mean, I didn't realize how well all of these things went together. I was just basically drawing more or less an amalgamation of thoughts that were coming to my mind. And of course, my mind has always been on spiritual things. And but I didn't realize, as I said, how profound this really is. It says, Subject 1, Crab Claw Man with Funny Helmet. And then this was my interpretation of what I read about some Dogon cave art reliefs. And then notice he's directly above the camel. Incredible. Now we'll see the camel pop up, and I didn't read it to you guys, but if we go on further, reading past verse 14 and coming to verse 15, and so shall be the plague of the horse and of the mule, of the camel and of the ass, and of all the beasts shall be in these tents as this plague. Very important calling them beasts. Notice that at the end it clarifies in the connection with the camel, as I've already done before, that it's to the connection of the Canaanites. And in that day there shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of the Lord of the host. Now, these basically symbolized animals here in verse 15. All symbolize beast of burden. All symbolize wandering, nomad Canaanites. And there are many apparitions throughout ancient scripture and history. And it will guarantee that that's what it's talking about when you get here to the last line, verse 21. The very last chapter, 14 of Zechariah, line 21. No more the Canaanite. Incredible. Now, as we come back here, now we got to remember with Cain, where does the very first blood genetic doctrine murdering dispute come from? Cain and Abel. At least biblically speaking, that you can recognize, because it is pre-existent before that. It most definitely is. But at least biblically speaking, in the tradition that most people view the Bible in Genesis, the civilization connected with Adam and Eve, as known as the Garden of Eden, but yet not realizing that there is a pre-civilization connected to Job, chapter 38, verses 1 through 7. I think it's chapter 38, it should be. But nonetheless, this is what's going to amaze me here. And maybe since we're going to try to keep it under 10 minutes, I'll get to this point first with the crab claws. Verse 13, and it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from the Lord shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor. His hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. They shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. And that's because of this tumult, in a sense. In essence, they begin to start turning on each other. Because I guess, in essence, they can no longer trust one another. As Jesus Christ has declared, their kingdom shall be divided. If it's divided, how shall it stand? But even looking deeper into this, as I was reading verse 12, of course you can see it's being described as a plague. Now, this, you've got to think something back with the moon here. And you got to think about Jerusalem being called Salem. And then you got to think about Salem with Salem's Lot. And then you got to think about camels, because that's still relative, and then Camelot. And then now you got to think Lot's wife and something about turning back, in which Jesus Christ was describing. And then you've got to understand where this hidden castle is, of this connection with the symbolism of Arthur, which now represents the New Jerusalem, the New Salem, in which the connection here to this Camelot, and that's going to be the moon. We know that the New Jerusalem comes down from somewhere. Where that be? That would be Shinar. That's the darkened right eye. Just like you get a black eye, you get a Shinar. That's the Shinar. That's the capital of Babylon, in which we know that tower to Babylon was built, at least within the scriptural perspective. So you can see all that comes together. So we've got a plague, and then most people would see this in connection with a nuclear fallout. And you could see that, because it's going to have fulfillment. There's going to be no doubt about it. As you see here on the moon, there's a tree and it's got the roots, but the tree also looks like a mushroom cloud. And then that mushroom cloud, as you could see, would be an explosion, and then it looks like wormwood. There's a little worm coming off the tree, right? Wormwood. It's all there. That's that tree that's planted. That's Ezekiel 19 in the dry place. So, but there's an emphasis here with the plague, with this consumption and wasting. Now you have to imagine this in connection with cancer, at least in my mind, because it's going to connect back with this symbolism here of crabs grabbing a hold of each other. So there's a cancer. There's almost like something in eating away. There's a consumption. There's a plague that you could almost simulate with leprosy. Have anybody ever heard the story of the leper king? Somewhere you've heard that before in your mind in the past. Well, that's going to symbolize the moon. That's the man on the moon. That's the face on the moon. It looks like it's got scars and sores all over it. That's the leprosy. We can even trace them back to the Mesoamerican deities. I can't even pronounce it, but it starts with an H, if I remember correctly. And I think there's a few other names. But he looks like he's got like intestines or a grotesque face all over him. And then we even see this in the Sumerian Anunnaki lore, as it describes some sort of god, this face of a god that is filled with intestines and grossness. Well, that would be this moon location. Now, this would connect back to something, at least the unhealthiness of this place due to the wars possibly that have been fought in this location, causing it to be a barren wasteland. That would, of course, be the wilderness, aka Sinai, aka Horeb, aka the Great Mount, the refuge. Zion means dry place. This would be in connection not only to that which is below, but that which is above. That is the moon location, Shinar. So this is something that's happening to these people there that quite possibly has happened in the past, that something is prophesied in Revelation that will happen to them there again. And I'm going to see it being compared in connection with cancer through leprosy, wasting and consumption shall consume away in their mouth. So remember the guardians of Gahul, and then we've got that owl. Remember his nose, something rotting away. Now, of course, I'm speaking faster because the audio goes out at every 10 minutes for 10 seconds, and then there's a time constraint. But The Guardians of Ga'Hoole is a movie animated about owls, and we see that the owls are divided, which are a singular evil owl faction. They're divided to make one portion look good, but it's all about Aryan descendancy. As you can see, the good owls supposedly are those snowy northern great white owls, and then of course that would symbolize the kingdoms of the north in association with the nomads, in association with the Pleiadians, in association with the Aryans. It's all the same thing. So this consumption, consuming away in their mouth. So something happens with them, and they find out that they have not been being treated fairly by one another, and they start laying hold of everyone supposedly previous his neighbor, at least within that club. And we see it says, shall lay hold everyone on the hand of his neighbor. Now think, this is what I heard. This is what is just so incredible how this works. Has anybody ever heard like the analogy, it's like crabs in a pot? I can't exactly remember how it says in complete, but I know it's kind of animated in what you see if you're grabbing one crab out of a bushel basket, that all the other crabs think that he's going somewhere good. So they lock on to him, and you get a bunch of crabs locked on by their claws, by their arms, one to another. But what the crabs don't realize is that the one crabs are actually going to the pot to boil. You get that? You get that? So then if we can assume that Rev 12 has something to do with this wasting plague that is consuming away, and that could even be compared with a very rapid form of cancer called leprosy, in which at least symbolically here speaking, it's all consistent. And then now we come to verse 13, which gives us this incredible depiction, analogy, metaphor of crabs grabbing one another by the hand, but yet in essence of hurting one another, turning on one another. Incredible. And it's right there. And then I see the camel right below, the nomads, the wanderers, and then of course it goes up to who the plague is associated with. Shall be the plague of the horse, of the mule, the camel, and of the ass. What have we been talking about? And of all the beasts that shall be in these tents. Tents is associated with nomads. Anybody ever heard of a tent city? Now, tents also look like pyramids, do they not? Little individual pyramids. But it's absolutely associated with merchants, Canaanites, and nomads, describing them now as beasts, in which they consider themselves to be this beast man, you know, having this great affinity with their animal nature, as you would see depicted in the movie The Chronicles of Riddick, which is really an expression for re-dick, re-phallus, Regine, as in Regina, from the movie The Night of the Comet, 1984. Who was the lead character female? She's called Regina. Now go to The Chronicles of Riddick. What's he called? Re-dick. And then he considers himself a Furian, a.k.a. Canaanite, and he's got the mark. Remember the mark of Cain, beginning of Genesis? There it is. There's the beastly nature. Watch him symbolize himself, or at least those that run the code symbolize the Canaanites as beasts. There it is, my friends. All of their symbolisms. These beasts that have been burdened with these ancient doctrines, and of course they try to push their own burdens off on the sons of men who are not. Look at that, my friends, and then guarantee that that's what it's talking about. And then think about the crab, which is cancer. And then about, they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. Remember I said they turn on one another. Jesus says they turn on one another. It's because they can't trust one another. They're not because something's happened other than it's been exposed that they're trying to destroy one another. They're lying to the people that they have hired into their clubs to get them higher than everyone else, for these people to lift them up, and then they plan on casting them away. Jesus won't cast you away. I tell you, that's the truth. So, crabs, cancer, leper, pot, grabbing with claws, the other crabs. Anybody ever heard about Potter's Field? Remember, they think they're going somewhere good, but in all reality, it's a relationship of the Potter's Field, which is an necropolis, a city of the dead. So I'm not sure how much longer this video I could go and see if it's going to upload. We're at about the 15-minute marker. We'll stop here. I'll be back.